When my daughter-in-law Jessica told me, "Don't expect a penny from us," at my wife's funeral, I felt my heart break and my anger rise. By the next morning, I had called my realtor about selling all the properties I secretly owned that kept their family comfortable. And that was just the beginning. Justice had to happen. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening in the comments. My name is Harold Brennan. I'm 74 years old. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, I used to live there with my wife Margaret until cancer took her away. Margaret and I were married for 48 years. We had one son together named David. David is 45 years old now and married to a woman named Jessica. David and Jessica have 2 children, twin boys named Tyler and Mason. They're 12 years old and they used to be the light of my life. But this story isn't about happy family memories. This story is about what happened when Margaret died and Jessica showed her true colors. Let me start from the beginning so you understand everything. Margaret got sick with lung cancer 2 years ago. She never smoked a day in her life, but sometimes bad things just happen to good people. The treatments were expensive, even with insurance. Chemotherapy, radiation, hospital stays, medications. The bills kept piling up month after month, but Margaret and I had been smart with money our whole lives. We owned several properties around Minneapolis that we rented out for income. Nobody in the family knew about these properties. Not David, not Jessica, not anyone. We kept our real estate business completely private. To everyone else, we looked like a regular retired couple living on Social Security and savings. We drove old cars and lived in a simple house. But the truth was different. We owned 8 rental properties worth over $2 million total. The monthly rent from these properties was our real income. During Margaret's illness, I used this rental money to pay for her medical care. I never worried about the cost, because I knew we could afford it. Margaret fought hard for 2 years. She went through every treatment the doctors recommended. I was by her side through everything. David and Jessica visited sometimes during Margaret's illness, but they always seemed uncomfortable in the hospital, like they didn't want to be there. Jessica especially acted strange around Margaret. She was polite but cold, like she was just going through the motions of being a good daughter-in-law. I noticed that Jessica always asked questions about money. How much were the medical bills? Did we have enough savings? Would we need help paying for things? I told Jessica that Margaret and I were managing fine financially. We didn't need any help from them, but Jessica kept pushing. She wanted to know exactly how much money we had. She asked about our will and what would happen to our assets. These questions made me uncomfortable. Why was Jessica so interested in our finances while Margaret was fighting for her life? David seemed embarrassed by Jessica's questions, but he never told her to stop asking. He just looked away and changed the subject. 3 months ago, Margaret's condition got much worse. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do. We had to prepare for the end. Margaret spent her last 2 weeks in hospice care. I stayed with her every day and night. I held her hand and told her how much I loved her. David and Jessica visited a few times during those final weeks, but their visits were short and awkward. Jessica spent most of her time on her phone instead of talking to Margaret. She acted like she had somewhere more important to be. On Margaret's last day, I called David and told him to come quickly. Margaret was fading fast, and I wanted him to say goodbye. David arrived within an hour, but Jessica didn't come with him. She said she had to pick up the boys from school. Margaret died peacefully that evening with just David and me by her side. My wife of 48 years was gone forever. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. I was grieving and exhausted, but I had to handle everything. David helped with some of the arrangements, but Jessica was mostly absent. She said she was too busy with the children to help much. The funeral was held at our local church. About 50 people came to pay their respects. Margaret had been loved by many friends and neighbors. I sat in the front row feeling lost and alone. David sat next to me with Jessica and the boys, the whole family together for one last time. After the service, people came up to offer their condolences. Everyone was kind and supportive. They shared memories of Margaret and told me how sorry they were. But then something happened that changed everything, something that showed me exactly who Jessica really was. As people were leaving the church, Jessica pulled me aside. She said she needed to talk to me privately about important matters. We stepped into a quiet corner of the church lobby. Jessica looked around to make sure nobody could hear us. Then Jessica said the words that will haunt me forever. She looked me straight in the eye and spoke with cold calculation. Harold, I want you to understand something clearly. Now that Margaret is gone, don't expect David and me to take care of you financially. I was shocked by her timing and her cruelness. My wife had just been buried an hour ago. We have our own family to worry about, Jessica continued. The boys need things for school and sports. We can't be supporting you two. I tried to speak, but Jessica wasn't finished with her speech. Don't expect a penny from us when you can't pay your bills. We're not responsible for your retirement problems. She said this at my wife's funeral, while I was grieving the love of my life. While people were still offering condolences in the next room, I stood there, in complete shock. I couldn't believe David's wife was this heartless and selfish. But then I remembered something that made me smile slightly. Jessica had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was talking to a helpless old man who would need her charity. She had no clue about the rental properties or the $2 million in assets I controlled. That night, after everyone went home, I sat alone in my empty house and made a decision. Jessica wanted to cut me off financially. She didn't want to support me in my old age. Fine, but she was about to learn that I had been supporting her family all along. Now let me tell you the full story of how I built David and Jessica's comfortable life. You need to understand everything I did for them before Jessica stabbed me in the back. David met Jessica 15 years ago when he was 30. He was working as a mechanic at a small auto repair shop making $12 an hour. Jessica was a part-time cashier at a grocery store. She made minimum wage and lived with 3 roommates to split the rent. They were both struggling financially when they started dating. Neither one had much money or any real prospects for the future, but they fell in love and got married after dating for 2 years. Margaret and I were happy to see David find someone. At first, Jessica seemed like a sweet girl. She was polite to Margaret and me. She helped with family dinners and remembered our birthdays. But I started noticing things about Jessica early on. She was always talking about money and what she wanted to buy. Jessica would point out expensive cars and houses when we drove around town. She talked constantly about wanting a better lifestyle. David worked hard, but his mechanic job barely paid enough for their small apartment. They lived paycheck to paycheck with no savings. That's when I decided to help them without letting them know where the money came from. You see, Margaret and I had been buying rental properties since the 1980s. We started with one small duplex and kept adding more buildings. By the time David got married, we owned 6 rental properties. The monthly income was over $8,000. But David and Jessica thought we were just regular retirees living on Social Security. We never told them about our real estate business. When David and Jessica got married, I secretly helped pay for their wedding. The total cost was $18,000. Jessica's parents could only afford $3,000. David and Jessica thought they would have to get married at City Hall with no reception. So I anonymously paid for the rest of the wedding through a friend who owned a catering company. Jessica got her dream wedding and never knew I paid for it. After the wedding, David and Jessica rented a tiny 1-bedroom apartment for $600 a month. The place was run down and in a bad neighborhood. Jessica complained constantly about their living situation. She said she was embarrassed to bring friends over to such a cheap apartment, so I found them a better apartment in a nicer area. The rent was $900 a month, which they couldn't afford on David's salary. I contacted the landlord and worked out a deal. I would pay $300 of their rent every month under a fake tenant assistance program. David and Jessica thought they qualified for some kind of government housing help. They never questioned why their rent was only $600 in such a nice place. For 3 years, I secretly paid $300 a month toward their rent. That's over $10,000 total. When Jessica got pregnant with the twins, she wanted to quit her grocery store job, but they needed her income to survive. I solved this problem too. I created a fake part-time job for Jessica, working as a bookkeeper for one of my rental properties. Jessica thought she was working for a property management company called Brennan Holdings. I realized that Brennan was my last name. I paid Jessica $800 a month for doing simple paperwork that took her maybe 5 hours. It was basically free money disguised as work. This fake job allowed Jessica to quit the grocery store and stay home with the babies when they were born. When Tyler and Mason were 2 years old, David and Jessica started talking about buying a house. but their credit was terrible and they had no money for a down payment. Jessica cried about living in an apartment while her friends owned homes. She said she felt like a failure as a mother, so I helped them buy their first house without them knowing. I found a nice 3-bedroom home in a good school district for $130,000. The sellers needed to close quickly, so I bought the house cash, using one of my business accounts. Then I created a rent-to-own agreement with David and Jessica. They thought they were buying the house from an investor who was willing to work with people who had bad credit. Their monthly payment was only $800, which was less than their apartment rent. Any real mortgage would have cost them at least $1,200 a month. For 8 years, David and Jessica lived in that house, thinking they were buying it from some generous investor. They never suspected their own father and father-in-law owned the property. When the boys started school, Jessica wanted them in the best district possible. But the house I bought them was in an average school zone, so we moved them to a better house in the top-rated school district. This house cost me $200,000. Again, I created a fake rent-to-own deal. David and Jessica thought they upgraded to a better property through the same mysterious investor. Their new payment was only $1,000 a month for a house that should have cost them $1,800. Over the years, I also helped with other expenses they never knew about. When David's car broke down, I anonymously paid for the repairs. When Jessica needed dental work, I covered the costs through a fake insurance program. When the boys needed equipment for sports, I made sure they could afford it. I even helped David get a better job. I knew someone who owned a larger auto repair shop and recommended David for a supervisor position. David's new job paid $22 an hour instead of $12. This extra income made their life much more comfortable. Altogether, over the past 15 years, I secretly spent over $150,000 supporting David and Jessica's family. $150,000. Money they never knew came from me. I paid for their wedding, their apartments, their house, Jessica's fake job, car repairs, medical bills, and countless other expenses. David and Jessica lived a middle-class lifestyle on working-class wages because I was secretly subsidizing everything they did. They thought they were lucky or smart with money. They had no idea that David's elderly father was the reason they could afford their comfortable life, and Jessica had the nerve to tell me not to expect financial help from them at Margaret's funeral. The woman who owed her entire lifestyle to my secret generosity was cutting me off from support I never asked for in the first place. But Jessica was about to learn something that would shock her to her core. She was about to discover who really controlled their comfortable world. The morning of Margaret's funeral was cold and gray. Perfect weather for saying goodbye to the woman I loved for almost 50 years. I woke up alone in our empty house and put on my black suit, the same suit I wore to our wedding all those years ago. Margaret had been dead for 3 days. Those 3 days felt like 3 years of loneliness and pain. David called me early that morning to check on me. He asked if I needed help getting to the church. I told him I could drive myself. I had been driving for 60 years and wasn't ready to give up that independence yet. But David insisted on picking me up. He said family should stick together during difficult times. When David arrived with Jessica and the boys, I was surprised by what I saw. Jessica was dressed in an expensive black dress I had never seen before. She was wearing new jewelry and carrying a designer purse. The boys wore brand new suits that must have cost $200 each. Everything looked perfect and expensive. I wondered where they got the money for all these new clothes. David's salary was decent, but not enough for designer outfits. Then I remembered that I was secretly paying for their comfortable lifestyle. My rental property money probably bought those funeral clothes. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica was dressed in clothes my money paid for while getting ready to cut me off financially. We drove to the church in uncomfortable silence. David tried to make small talk, but Jessica stared out the window, ignoring everyone. Tyler and Mason seemed confused by the sadness around them. They kept asking when Grandma Margaret was coming home. It broke my heart to hear them ask about Margaret. These boys would grow up without knowing their grandmother's love. At the church, I was amazed by how many people came to honor Margaret. She had touched so many lives over the years. Margaret's sister flew in from California. Our old neighbors from the first house we owned together came to pay respects. Friends from Margaret's book club, her bridge group, and her volunteer work at the animal shelter all showed up. Even people I hadn't seen in years took time to attend Margaret's funeral. She was truly loved by her community. The pastor gave a beautiful eulogy about Margaret's kindness and generosity. He talked about her volunteer work and how she helped struggling families. I sat in the front pew listening to stories about my wife's good deeds. Margaret always helped people quietly without expecting recognition. She would secretly pay for groceries for families who couldn't afford food. She bought school supplies for children whose parents were unemployed. Margaret volunteered at the food bank every Tuesday for 20 years. She never missed a week unless she was sick. Hearing about Margaret's generosity made me proud, but it also made me think about Jessica's selfishness. Margaret spent her life helping others. Jessica only cared about what she could get for herself. After the eulogy, several people stood up to share memories of Margaret. Each story made me love my wife even more. But I noticed that Jessica never shed a single tear during the entire service. She looked bored and kept checking her phone. David cried quietly next to me. The boys were too young to fully understand what was happening. When the service ended, we moved to the cemetery for the burial. This was the hardest part for me. Watching Margaret's casket being lowered into the ground felt like watching my heart being buried too. I threw a handful of dirt onto the casket and whispered goodbye to my best friend and partner. After the burial, everyone came back to the church for lunch and to share more memories of Margaret. This is where Jessica chose to show her true colors. This is where she revealed who she really was. People were still eating and talking about Margaret when Jessica pulled me aside. She said we needed to have an important conversation. We walked to a quiet corner near the church kitchen. Jessica looked around to make sure nobody could hear us. "Harold, I need to be honest with you about something." Jessica started with a cold voice. "Now that Margaret is gone, things are going to be different. David and I have discussed this." I had no idea what she was talking about. Different how? "We can't be responsible for taking care of you financially," Jessica continued. "We have our own family to worry about." I was confused. Nobody had asked them to take care of me. Where was this coming from? "The boys need money for school activities and sports equipment. We're saving for their college funds." Jessica was talking like I was some burden they had been supporting, like I had been asking them for money. "We know old people expect their children to support them when they can't work anymore," Jessica said. "But David and I agreed that we won't be doing that. We can't afford to support you." This conversation was happening while people were still celebrating Margaret's life in the next room. "Don't expect a penny from us when you can't pay your bills," Jessica said with no emotion in her voice. "We're not responsible for your retirement problems. You should have saved more money when you were younger." I stood there in complete shock. My wife had been dead for less than a week, and Jessica was cutting me off from support I never asked for. "I hope you understand that this is just business," Jessica added. "Nothing personal against you." Nothing personal? She was abandoning her husband's father at his wife's funeral and calling it business. I finally found my voice. "Jessica, I never asked you for money. I don't need your support." "Sure you don't," Jessica laughed. "All old people say that until the bills pile up. You'll come asking for help eventually. And when you do, the answer will be no." Jessica walked away and rejoined the group like nothing had happened. She smiled and made small talk with other mourners. I stood there alone, processing what had just occurred. The mask had finally come off, and I saw Jessica's true nature. But Jessica made one crucial mistake in her cruel calculation. She assumed I was a helpless old man who would need her charity. She had no idea that I controlled the money that paid for her comfortable lifestyle. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Jessica wanted to cut me off financially. Perfect. I was about to cut her off too. That night, I sat alone in my empty house, surrounded by the silence that would become my new normal. Margaret was gone forever. David and Jessica had shown their true colors at the funeral. I was completely alone for the first time in decades. But as I sat there thinking about Jessica's cruel words, I realized something important. I wasn't the helpless old man she thought I was. Jessica had made the biggest mistake of her life. She assumed I was poor and would need her support. She had no idea that I was worth over $2 million. She didn't know about the rental properties that generated thousands of dollars every month. Let me tell you exactly what I owned. These numbers might shock you as much as they would shock Jessica. My first property was a duplex I bought in 1983 for $45,000. It was worth $200,000 now. The duplex brought in $1,800 in rent every month. That's $21,600 per year from just one building. My second property was a 4-unit apartment building I purchased in 1987. I paid $68,000 for it. That building was now worth $320,000. The monthly rent from all 4 units was $2,800. Property number 3 was a small office building I bought in 1991. The purchase price was $95,000. The office building had 3 rental units that brought in $3,400 per month. It was worth $400,000 now. I also owned 2 single-family rental houses. One I bought for $52,000 in 1989. The other cost $78,000 in 1994. These houses were worth $160,000 and $190,000 respectively. The monthly rent from both houses combined was $2,600. My newest properties were a small strip mall and another apartment building. I bought the strip mall in 2002 for $150,000. The strip mall had 6 retail spaces that brought in $4,200 in monthly rent. It was worth over $500,000 now. The second apartment building cost me $200,000 in 2006. It had 8 units generating $5,600 per month. When I added up all my properties, the total value was over $2.1 million. The monthly rental income from all 8 properties was over $19,000. That's more than $230,000 per year. More money than David made in 4 years at his mechanic job. And Jessica thought I would need their financial support. But the real shock was when I calculated how much money I had secretly spent supporting David and Jessica's family over the years. I got out my financial records and started adding up every payment I made on their behalf. Their wedding cost $18,000. I paid $15,000 of that total. The extra rent I covered for their first apartment was $300 per month for 3 years. That's $10,800. Jessica's fake bookkeeper job paid her $800 per month for 10 years. That's $96,000 total. The house they thought they were buying from an investor. I purchased it for $130,000 cash. Their monthly payments of $800 over 8 years only totaled $76,800. That means I gave them a $53,200 discount on the house price. When we moved them to the better house, I bought it for $200,000. Their payments of $1,000 per month for 7 years totaled $84,000. So I gave them another discount of $116,000 on that property. The car repairs, medical bills, sports equipment, and other secret payments added up to at least $20,000 more. When I finished calculating everything, the total amount was shocking. Over $300,000. $300,000 I had secretly spent supporting Jessica's comfortable lifestyle over 15 years. Jessica was living in a house I owned. She was driving cars I helped repair. Her children played sports with equipment I helped buy. Every comfort in Jessica's life existed because of my generosity. And she had the nerve to cut me off at Margaret's funeral. I sat there staring at those numbers and feeling a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger because Jessica was so ungrateful and cruel. Satisfaction because I had the power to change everything. You see, Jessica didn't know that I owned the house she lived in. She thought she was buying it from some mysterious investor. Jessica didn't know that her comfortable monthly payment was subsidized by me. She thought she got lucky with a good deal. Most importantly, Jessica didn't know that I could take it all away whenever I wanted to. I owned the properties. I controlled the rental agreements. I had the power to evict them or raise their payments to market rates. Jessica wanted to cut me off financially. She said not to expect a penny from their family. Fine. But Jessica was about to learn that she had been living off my pennies all along. As I put away my financial records, I started thinking about what to do next. I could raise their house payment to the actual market rate. Instead of $1,000 per month, they should be paying $1,800. I could evict them completely and sell the house to someone else. They would have to find a new place to live and qualify for their own mortgage. I could also stop all the other secret support I provided. No more anonymous car repairs or medical bill payments. Let them see how comfortable their life really was without my hidden generosity. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea of teaching Jessica a lesson about gratitude and respect. She treated me like a burden at my wife's funeral. Now she was going to learn who the real burden was in this relationship. Jessica thought she was cutting ties with a helpless old man. Instead, she had just declared war on her secret benefactor, and I was about to win that war. The morning after Margaret's funeral, I woke up with a clear plan in my mind. Jessica wanted to cut me off financially. Now I was going to cut her off too. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I needed to write down everything I was going to do. First, I had to decide what to do with the house David and Jessica were living in. The house I owned, but they thought belonged to some investor. I had two choices. I could evict them and sell the house to someone else, or I could raise their monthly payment to the actual market rate. Market rate for that house was $1,800 per month. They were only paying $1,000 because I was subsidizing $800. If I raised their payment to market rate, they would struggle to afford it. David's income could barely cover $1,800 for housing, but evicting them would be even more dramatic. They would have to find a new place to live and qualify for their own mortgage with their bad credit. I decided to start with raising the rent. If they couldn't handle that, then I would move to eviction. Next, I had to figure out how to reveal that I owned their house without exposing all my other properties. I needed a believable story about how I became the owner, something that wouldn't make them suspicious about my other real estate holdings. I could say that the original investor sold the house to me recently, that I bought it as a retirement investment property. This would explain why the rental agreement was changing. New owner, new rules, new payment amounts. I also needed to stop Jessica's fake bookkeeper job immediately. She had been collecting $800 per month for work that barely existed. Jessica thought she worked for a property management company called Brennan Holdings. She never connected that Brennan was my last name. I could simply eliminate her position and tell her the company was downsizing. No more free money for Jessica. Without that $800 per month, Jessica would have to find a real job or David would have to work more hours. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Robert Mason. I had worked with Robert for 20 years on all my real estate deals. "Robert, I need to make some changes to my rental properties," I said. "What kind of changes, Harold?" Robert asked. "I want to raise the rent on one of my properties to market rate, and I want to terminate a fake employment contract." Robert was confused. A fake employment contract? I explained the whole situation to Robert, how I had been secretly supporting David and Jessica, how Jessica insulted me at Margaret's funeral. Robert listened quietly as I told him about the rent subsidies and the fake bookkeeper job. "Harold, this is a complicated situation," Robert said when I finished. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm completely sure," I replied. "Jessica made her choice at the funeral. Now she gets to live with the consequences." Robert agreed to help me with the legal paperwork. We scheduled a meeting for the next day to go over everything. After hanging up with Robert, I called my accountant, Linda Walsh. I needed to understand the tax implications of my plan. "Linda, I'm going to be making some changes to my rental income," I said. I explained that I was stopping the rent subsidies and eliminating Jessica's fake job. "This will actually increase your taxable income significantly," Linda pointed out. She was right. When I stopped subsidizing David and Jessica, I would keep more of the rental money for myself. The $800 per month I had been giving Jessica would become income for me. That's $9,600 more per year. The $800 per month I had been discounting on their rent would also become my income. Another $9,600 per year. Combined, I would have over $19,000 more in annual income, money that had been going to support Jessica's ungrateful family. "Are you sure you want to do this, Harold?" Linda asked, just like Robert had. "Linda, my wife just died and my daughter-in-law told me not to expect any support from the family," I explained. "If they don't want to be family, then they don't get family benefits." Linda understood my position and agreed to help with the financial changes. That afternoon, I drove around the city looking at my rental properties, all 8 buildings that generated my wealth and independence. I thought about selling some of them to simplify my life. With Margaret gone, I didn't need as much monthly income. But then I decided to keep everything. These properties were my security and my power. I wasn't giving up either one. Instead, I would use the extra income from ending Jessica's subsidies to travel and enjoy my remaining years. Margaret and I had always planned to travel more in retirement. Cancer stole that dream from us. Now I could honor Margaret's memory by visiting all the places we talked about seeing together. I could afford first-class flights, luxury hotels, and fine dining. The money I saved by cutting off Jessica would pay for a wonderful retirement. That evening, I started drafting the letters that would change everything. The first letter was to Jessica, terminating her fake bookkeeper position. I made it sound like a normal business decision. Due to economic conditions, Brennan Holdings is eliminating several part-time positions. Your bookkeeper role will end on the 15th of next month. The second letter was to David and Jessica about the rent increase. I explained that the property had been sold to a new owner who was raising rents to market rates. Effective next month, your monthly payment will increase from $1,000 to $1,800. This reflects current market conditions in your area. Both letters were professional and businesslike. No anger or emotion. Just cold facts about changing financial arrangements. I sealed both letters in envelopes and put them on my kitchen counter. Tomorrow I would mail them and set my plan in motion. Jessica thought she was cutting ties with a helpless old man. Instead, she was about to discover that the helpless old man controlled her entire comfortable world. The woman who said, "Don't expect a penny from us," was about to learn she had been living on my pennies all along. 2 weeks after I mailed the letters, my phone started ringing constantly. David called me 3 times in one day. I didn't answer any of his calls. I wanted to let the panic build before I talked to them. The first letter Jessica received was about losing her bookkeeper job. She got that news on a Tuesday morning. According to my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, Jessica was screaming on her front porch when she read the letter. Mrs. Henderson could hear Jessica yelling about unfair business practices and wrongful termination. She was furious about losing her easy $800 per month. Jessica immediately started calling other property management companies looking for similar work, but nobody needed a part-time bookkeeper with her limited experience. The fake job I created for her was the only one that paid so much money for so little work. Without that $800, David and Jessica's monthly budget was destroyed. They depended on that money for groceries and utilities. 3 days later, the rent increase letter arrived. This was the real shock that sent them into full panic mode. David called me that same evening. I finally decided to answer and hear what he had to say. "Dad, we got some terrible news today," David said in a worried voice. "What kind of news?" I asked calmly. "The investor who owns our house is raising our rent by $800. We can't afford $1,800 per month." I pretended to be surprised. "That's a big increase, David. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," David replied. "Jessica lost her bookkeeper job this week, too. We're losing $1,300 in monthly income." $1,300. The exact amount I had been secretly subsidizing their lifestyle. "That sounds like a difficult situation," I said, without offering to help. David waited for me to volunteer some kind of assistance. When I didn't, he continued talking. "Dad, I know things have been awkward since Mom's funeral, but we really need some help right now." "What kind of help?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Maybe you could lend us some money until we figure things out, just to cover the rent increase for a few months." David was asking me for the same money I had been giving him secretly for years. "I'm sorry, David, but I can't help you financially," I replied. "I'm living on a fixed income myself. But Dad, if we can't pay the new rent, we'll have to move. The kids are settled in their school and have friends here." "That would be unfortunate," I said. "But Jessica made it clear at your mother's funeral that I shouldn't expect financial support from your family." "What does that have to do with us needing help now?" David asked. "It means that financial independence works both ways, son. If you can't support me, then I can't support you either." David was quiet for a long moment. He was starting to understand that his wife's cruel words had consequences. "Dad," Jessica was upset at the funeral. "She didn't mean what she said about not helping you." "She seemed very clear about her position," I replied. "I'm just following her advice about being financially independent." I hung up before David could argue. Further, let him explain the situation to Jessica and see how she reacted. 2 days later, Jessica called me herself. This was the first time she had contacted me since the funeral. "Harold, David told me about your conversation," Jessica started in a fake sweet voice. "We're going through a really tough time right now, both of us losing income at the same time." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, without any emotion. "I was wondering if you could help us out just this once. We've never asked you for money before." "Never asked for money before." Jessica had been living off my money for 15 years and didn't even know it. Jessica, you made your feelings about financial support very clear at Margaret's funeral, I reminded her. That was different, Jessica said quickly. I was talking about long-term care for elderly people. This is just a temporary emergency. I see. So you only want financial independence to go one direction. Jessica was getting frustrated with my calm responses. She expected me to jump at the chance to help them. Harold, we're family. Family helps each other during emergencies. You're right about family helping each other, I agreed. That's exactly what I've been thinking about lately. So you'll help us with the rent increase? Jessica asked hopefully. Actually, I've been thinking about how families should treat each other with respect and gratitude, I replied. I don't understand what you mean, Jessica said, though I think she was starting to get nervous. I mean that when someone helps their family for years, they shouldn't be insulted at funerals. Jessica was quiet for a moment. She was beginning to realize that her cruel words had damaged our relationship permanently. Harold, I apologize if I hurt your feelings at the funeral. I was emotional and said things I didn't mean. You seemed very calm and calculated when you told me not to expect a penny from your family. I made a mistake, Jessica admitted. Can we please move past this? We really need your help right now. I'm afraid I can't help you, Jessica. I need to focus on my own financial security in my old age. After I hung up, I felt a deep satisfaction. Jessica was finally experiencing the consequences of her selfishness, but this was just the beginning. They still had no idea that I owned the house they were living in. They thought they were dealing with bad luck and unfortunate timing. They had no clue that their loving father and father-in-law was behind their financial crisis. The best part was still coming. Soon they would discover the real truth about who controlled their comfortable world. The next morning, I drove to my attorney's office to gather all the legal documents I would need for the big reveal. Robert Mason had been my lawyer for 20 years. He handled all my real estate purchases and knew every detail of my property empire. Harold, are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this? Robert asked when I sat down in his office. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. Jessica made her choice at Margaret's funeral. Robert pulled out a thick file containing all my property deeds and legal documents. Let's start with the house David and Jessica are living in, Robert said, handing me the paperwork. I looked at the deed showing that I purchased the property for $130,000 in cash 8 years ago. The document clearly showed my name as the sole owner, Harold Brennan. No co-owners, no mortgage company, no investors. Do they have any legal claim to this property? I asked Robert. None whatsoever, Robert confirmed. They have a month-to-month rental agreement. You can terminate it with 30 days' notice. This was perfect. David and Jessica thought they were buying the house from some mysterious investor. In reality, they were just tenants in my rental property. What about their payment history? I asked. Can I use that as evidence? Robert showed me copies of all their monthly payments over the past 8 years. Every check was made out to Brennan Holdings, my property management company. They've been paying you rent this entire time, Robert pointed out. They just didn't realize it was you. I also asked Robert to prepare eviction paperwork, just in case I decided to go that route instead of just raising their rent. How much notice do I have to give them? I asked. 30 days for a rent increase. 30 days for eviction if they don't pay the new amount. Robert prepared 2 sets of legal documents. One set raised their rent to market rate. The other set terminated their tenancy completely. Which option do you want to use? Robert asked. Let me think about it over the weekend, I replied. I want to choose the option that teaches Jessica the biggest lesson. Next, we went through the paperwork for Jessica's fake bookkeeper job. Robert had helped me set up the employment contract years ago. This contract allows you to terminate her position at any time, Robert explained. You don't need to give a reason. Good. I want that woman to understand what it feels like to lose income unexpectedly. Robert also showed me documentation for all the other properties I owned. 8 buildings total, worth over $2 million. Harold, you could retire very comfortably just on the rental income from these properties, Robert noted. I know. That's what makes Jessica's behavior at the funeral so insulting. After meeting with Robert, I drove to my accountant's office. Linda Walsh needed to prepare financial statements showing my net worth. Linda, I want official documentation of everything I own, I told her. Property values, monthly income, total assets. What do you need this documentation for? Linda asked. I'm going to show my family exactly who they're dealing with, I replied. Linda prepared a comprehensive financial statement that was shocking even to me. My 8 rental properties were now worth $2.3 million total. Property values in Minneapolis had gone up significantly in recent years. The monthly rental income from all properties combined was over $21,000. That's more than $250,000 per year. I also had $400,000 in savings accounts and retirement funds. My total net worth was $2.7 million. Almost $3 million. Harold, you're wealthier than most people realize, Linda said as she handed me the financial statements. That's exactly the point, I replied. My family thinks I'm some poor old man who needs their charity. I asked Linda to prepare multiple copies of the financial statements. I wanted backup documentation in case I needed it. That afternoon, I organized all my paperwork at home: property deeds, rental agreements, financial statements, and legal documents. Everything was sorted by property and filed in separate folders. I wanted to be able to find any document quickly when the time came. I also prepared a timeline showing how much money I had secretly spent supporting David and Jessica over the years. Wedding expenses, rent subsidies, fake job payments, car repairs, medical bills, and housing discounts. The total amount was over $300,000. $300,000 of my money had supported Jessica's comfortable lifestyle while she thought I was poor. That evening, I practiced what I would say when I revealed the truth to them. I wanted to stay calm and factual. No yelling or emotional speeches. Just cold, hard evidence of their hypocrisy. I would start by showing them the deed to their house with my name on it. Then I would explain how I had been subsidizing their rent for 8 years without them knowing. Next, I would reveal that Jessica's bookkeeper job was fake and paid for with my money. Finally, I would show them the financial statements proving I was worth almost $3 million. By the end of my presentation, David and Jessica would understand exactly what they had thrown away. They would realize that the poor old man they disrespected at Margaret's funeral was actually their secret benefactor. The woman who told me, "Don't expect a penny from us," had been living off my pennies for 15 years. I put all the documents in a briefcase and locked it. Tomorrow I would decide whether to evict them or just raise their rent. Either way, David and Jessica were about to learn who really controlled their comfortable world. The lesson was going to be devastating and permanent. After spending the weekend thinking about my options, I made my final decision. I wasn't going to just raise their rent. I was going to evict David and Jessica completely. They needed to learn the harshest lesson possible. On Monday morning, I called Robert and told him to prepare the eviction paperwork. "Are you sure about this, Harold?" Robert asked one more time. "Absolutely sure," I replied. Jessica wanted financial independence. Now she's going to get it. Robert prepared official 30-day eviction notices along with all the supporting documentation. The eviction papers clearly stated that I, Harold Brennan, was the legal owner of the property. David and Jessica had 30 days to move out. I also asked Robert to prepare a complete financial summary of everything I had paid for over the years. Wedding costs, rent subsidies, Jessica's fake job, car repairs, medical bills. Every single dollar I had secretly spent supporting their family. The total came to $312,000. More money than David would make in 6 years. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove to David and Jessica's house. My house, actually, but they didn't know that yet. I parked in the driveway and sat in my car for a moment. This was going to change everything permanently. I walked up to the front door carrying my briefcase full of legal documents. I could hear the boys playing video games inside. David answered the door looking stressed and tired. The financial pressure was clearly getting to him. "Hi, Dad," David said with surprise. "What brings you by?" "I need to talk to you and Jessica about something important," I replied. "Come in," David said, stepping aside. "Jessica's in the kitchen." I walked into the living room where Tyler and Mason were playing games on the couch. "Hi, Grandpa Harold," they said without looking away from their screens. These innocent boys had no idea their world was about to be turned upside down. Jessica came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked uncomfortable seeing me in their house. "Harold, what a surprise," Jessica said with a fake smile. "We need to have a family meeting," I announced, setting my briefcase on their coffee table. "A family meeting about what?" Jessica asked nervously. "Boys, Go play in your room for a while, David told Tyler and Mason. The adults need to talk. Once the children were upstairs, I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first document. I received some interesting paperwork this week, I began calmly. I handed David the eviction notice. It seems there's been a misunderstanding about who owns this house. David read the paper with confusion growing on his face. This says you're evicting us. But you don't own this house. Actually, I do, I replied, pulling out the property deed. Jessica grabbed the deed from David's hands and stared at it. Her face went completely white. This has to be fake, Jessica whispered. Some investor owns this house. We've been buying it from him for 8 years. You've been renting it from me for 8 years, I corrected. There never was any mysterious investor. David sat down heavily on the couch. Dad, what are you talking about? I pulled out copies of all their monthly rent payments. Every check made out to Brennan Holdings. Brennan Holdings is my property management company, I explained. You've been paying me rent this entire time. Jessica was shaking as she looked through the payment records. This can't be real. We thought we were buying this house. You thought wrong, I replied calmly. You're tenants. And now you're being evicted. But why? David asked desperately. What did we do wrong? I pulled out the financial summary Robert had prepared. Let me show you exactly what you did wrong. I spread the documents across their coffee table. Wedding expenses, rent subsidies, fake job payments, car repairs. Over the past 15 years, I have secretly spent $312,000 supporting your family. Jessica stared at the numbers in disbelief. $300,000? Your wedding, this house, Jessica's bookkeeper job, car repairs, medical bills, all paid for with my money. David was reading through the itemized list. Dad, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I could give you, I replied. And at Margaret's funeral, Jessica made it very clear what kind of people you really are. Jessica was crying now. Harold, I'm sorry. I didn't know about any of this. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask, I said coldly. You assumed I was poor and pathetic. I pulled out my financial statements showing my net worth of $2.7 million. The poor old man you disrespected at your grandmother's funeral is worth almost $3 million. David dropped the papers in shock. $3 million. Dad, how is that possible? I own 8 rental properties around Minneapolis. The monthly income is over $21,000. Jessica was hyperventilating. $21,000 per month? That's more than David makes all year. Exactly, I replied. The woman who told me, don't expect a penny from us, has been living off my pennies for 15 years. At that moment, Mrs. Henderson from next door knocked on the front door. She had seen my car and wanted to check on the family. David let her in, not thinking clearly because of the shock. Mrs. Henderson immediately noticed Jessica crying and all the papers spread across the table. Is everything okay, Mrs.? Henderson asked with concern. Harold owns our house, Jessica sobbed. He's been supporting us for years and we never knew. Mrs. Henderson looked at me with newfound respect. Harold, I had no idea you were so successful. Most people don't, I replied. I prefer to keep my business private. And now you're evicting them? Mrs. Henderson asked. They made it clear at Margaret's funeral that they don't want to be financially connected to me, I explained. Mrs. Henderson understood immediately. I see. They wanted independence, and now they're getting it. David was begging now. Dad, please don't do this. We can work something out. We'll apologize. We'll do better. It's too late for apologies, I replied, closing my briefcase. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I walked toward the door, leaving them sitting in shock, surrounded by the evidence of their ingratitude. Harold, Jessica called desperately. What about the boys? They'll have to change schools. I turned around and looked at her with cold eyes. You should have thought about that at Margaret's funeral. Over the next few days, David and Jessica called me constantly. They left voicemails begging for forgiveness and another chance. Jessica cried on every phone message. She said she was sorry for what she said at Margaret's funeral. David promised they would treat me better if I just gave them one more opportunity to prove themselves. But I didn't answer any of their calls. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they had done. By the end of the week, they started showing up at my house. David came alone the first time. He knocked on my door for 20 minutes, pleading through the window for me to let him in. "Dad, please just talk to me," David called out. "We can fix this. We're family." I watched him from my living room window but never opened the door. He eventually gave up and drove away. The next day, Jessica came with the boys. She thought bringing my grandchildren would change my mind. Tyler and Mason ran up to my door, excited to see me. "Grandpa Harold, Mom says we might have to move away." This was the hardest part. These innocent children were suffering because of their parents' greed and disrespect. But I couldn't let Jessica manipulate me by using the boys as emotional weapons. I opened the door just long enough to hug Tyler and Mason. Then I told Jessica to leave my property. "Harold, please don't punish the children for my mistakes," Jessica begged. "You should have thought about the children when you insulted me at Margaret's funeral," I replied. "I was wrong. I admit it. What do I need to do to make this right?" "Nothing," I said firmly. "Some mistakes can't be fixed." I closed the door and listened to Jessica crying on my front porch. The boys were confused and asking why Grandpa wouldn't talk to them. After they left, I felt terrible about hurting Tyler and Mason. But their parents had created this situation, not me. The following week, David and Jessica tried a different approach. They brought Sarah's parents with them. Jessica's mother knocked on my door. "Harold, we need to talk about this family conflict." I let them in because I respected Jessica's parents. They had always been kind to me and Margaret. "Harold, we know Jessica said some hurtful things at the funeral," Jessica's father began, "but she's learned her lesson. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" Jessica sat on my couch, crying while her parents pleaded her case. "I never meant to hurt you," Jessica said through her tears. "I was scared about money and said stupid things." "You weren't scared," I corrected. "You were cruel and calculating." "You're right," Jessica admitted. "I was thinking about myself instead of being grateful for everything you've done," David added. "Dad, we never knew you were supporting us all these years. We thought we were doing well on our own." "That was the point," I replied. "I wanted to help without making you feel dependent. And we threw it all away because we judged you by your appearance," Jessica said. Jessica's mother tried to mediate. "Harold, Jessica has learned from this mistake. Isn't family about forgiveness?" "Family is also about respect and gratitude," I replied. "Things Jessica never showed me." "What can we do to earn your forgiveness?" David asked desperately. I thought about this question for a long moment. Was there anything they could do to fix this? "You want to know what you can do?" I asked. "It's too late. You showed me who you really are." "People can change," Jessica insisted. "I'm not the same person who said those things at the funeral." "You're only sorry because you found out I'm wealthy," I pointed out. "If I was actually poor, you'd still be avoiding me." Jessica couldn't argue with this because it was absolutely true. "Harold, what about the boys?" Jessica's father asked. "They'll have to change schools and leave their friends." "That's unfortunate," I replied. But Jessica made that choice when she decided to cut ties with me. After Jessica's parents left, I thought seriously about whether I should forgive them. Margaret would have wanted me to be the bigger person. She always believed in second chances and family harmony. But Margaret also believed in standing up for yourself. She wouldn't have tolerated Jessica's disrespect either. The next day, I called Robert and asked him to slow down the eviction process. "Are you having second thoughts?" Robert asked. "Maybe," I replied. "But if I give them another chance, it needs to be on my terms completely." I decided to make David and Jessica an offer. One final opportunity to prove they had really changed. They could stay in the house, but they would pay full market rent. $1,800 per month. No subsidies. Jessica would have to find a real job to replace the fake bookkeeper position I had eliminated. Most importantly, they would have to publicly acknowledge everything I had done for their family over the years. I wanted David to tell his friends and coworkers that his father was a successful businessman who had been secretly supporting them. I wanted Jessica to admit to her family and friends that she had been wrong about me at the funeral. If they agreed to these terms and followed through for 6 months, I would consider letting them stay long term. But if they failed to meet any of these conditions, the eviction would continue with no further chances. I called David and explained my offer. "Dad, we'll do anything you want," David said immediately. "Don't agree so quickly," I warned. "Think about what I'm asking. Full market rent, Jessica gets a real job, and public acknowledgement of your mistakes." "We can handle it," David insisted. And if you fail to meet these conditions, you're out permanently. No more begging or second chances. David promised they would prove themselves worthy of my forgiveness. But I wasn't holding my breath. People like Jessica don't change overnight. We would see if their apologies were real or just panic about losing their comfortable lifestyle. 6 months have passed since I gave David and Jessica their final chance. I'm sitting here today to tell you exactly what happened. For the first month, they tried really hard to meet my conditions. David paid the full market rent of $1,800 on time. Jessica found a real job working at a bank downtown. She made $12 an hour, which was much less than her fake bookkeeper position. They even started telling people the truth about how I had supported them over the years. David told his coworkers that his father was a successful real estate investor. He admitted that I had been secretly helping their family. Jessica apologized to her parents for the way she treated me at Margaret's funeral. She told them I was actually wealthy and generous. For a few weeks, I thought maybe they had really learned their lesson. Maybe Jessica had genuinely changed. But by the second month, their true nature started showing again. Jessica complained constantly about her new job. She said $12 an hour wasn't enough money for someone with her experience. She started hinting that I should help them with money again. Small comments about how tight their budget was. David joined in with subtle requests for financial assistance. They needed new tires for their car. The boys needed equipment for sports. These weren't direct requests for money. They were manipulative hints designed to make me feel guilty. By the third month, they stopped pretending completely. Jessica called me and said the full rent payment was too much for them to handle. She asked if I could reduce it back to $1,000. When I refused, she got angry and said I was being unreasonable. She said families should help each other during difficult times. Jessica, you told me at Margaret's funeral not to expect a penny from your family. I reminded her. That was different, Jessica replied. I was emotional and said things I didn't mean, but I could tell she was lying. Jessica was only sorry because she got caught being ungrateful. The final straw came in month 4 when they missed their rent payment completely. David called and said they had unexpected medical bills and couldn't pay the full $1,800. He offered to pay $1,000 and make up the difference next month. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I had been dealing with for years. They always had excuses for why they needed special treatment. David, we had an agreement, I said calmly. Full market rent with no exceptions. But Dad, we're trying our best. Can't you be flexible just this once? No, I replied firmly. You either meet the Bray conditions or you're evicted. Those were the terms. David tried to argue, but I hung up the phone. The next day, I called Robert and told him to proceed with the eviction immediately. Are you sure this time? Robert asked. Completely sure, I replied. They failed the test exactly like I knew they would. 2 weeks later, David and Jessica were forced to move out of my house. They found a small apartment across town that cost $1,300 per month. The boys had to change schools and leave their friends behind. It was heartbreaking to watch, but it was the consequence of their parents' choices. Since then, I haven't spoken to David or Jessica at all. They stopped calling after they realized I was serious about cutting them off. I heard through neighbors that they're struggling financially in their new place. Jessica had to get a second job to help pay their bills. David is working overtime at the garage, but they're still barely making ends meet. Meanwhile, my life has improved dramatically. Without the stress of dealing with ungrateful family members, I feel free. I sold the house David and Jessica used to live in for $250,000. The new owners are a lovely young couple who actually appreciate the property. I used the money from that sale to buy a beautiful condo downtown. It has a view of the Mississippi River and all the amenities I could want. I also started traveling like Margaret and I always planned to do. I've been to Ireland, Scotland, and Italy in the past 6 months. Every trip was first class with luxury hotels and fine dining. I can afford whatever makes me happy. More importantly, I've met genuine people who like me for who I am, not what I can give them. I joined a senior center where I play cards and attend social events. Everyone there treats me with respect and kindness. I also volunteer at a local charity that helps homeless families. These people show more gratitude for a free meal than Jessica ever showed for $300,000. I updated my will to leave everything to various charities instead of David, organizations that actually help people in need. The homeless shelter will get $500,000. The animal rescue where Margaret volunteered will get $300,000. The rest will go to children's charities and educational programs. People who will use my money to make the world better. David will inherit nothing except the knowledge that he threw away millions of dollars because his wife couldn't show basic respect. Looking back on this experience, I learned important lessons about family and boundaries. First, you teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you'll get more disrespect. Second, generosity should never be taken for granted. People who don't appreciate help don't deserve help. Third, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and demand the respect you've earned. Most importantly, real family lifts you up instead of tearing you down. Margaret would be proud of me for finally setting boundaries with David and Jessica. She always said I was too generous for my own good. Now I'm surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. At 74 years old, I finally have the peaceful, respectful relationships I always deserved. Jessica thought she was cutting ties with a burden. Instead, she lost access to generational wealth because of her cruelty and greed. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always finds a way. If you are still here and enjoyed this story, please like this video. It really helps me know you want more content like this. If this story gave you some value or made you think, please share it with your friends or someone who needs to hear this message. If you have any questions or suggestions about this story, please type them in the comments below. I love reading what you think. If you want more stories like this one, please subscribe to this channel. There are many more stories coming. Remember, respect is earned through actions, not demanded through blood relations.